It has been 10 years since I lost the use of my left leg. I was at home, sitting in the living room with my younger sister, who was younger than me by a year, sitting in the opposite room, and as I was sitting there, through the roof fell a giant sheep. Well, it was a normal sized sheep, but since I was only 8, it looked fairly giant to me, and it fell and it grazed my right leg. But it was far worse than just grazing my right leg. It went straight through my left leg, and my left leg was completely detached from the knee down. And she screamed for my parents, but my parents were not home, for they had died in a car crash 5 years ago. No, actually it was a plane crash. So she called for my foster parents, but they were also not home, for they also died in the same plane crash 5 years ago. So then she called for the neighbours, and the neighbours who had died 2 years ago in a skiing accident were dead. However, it turns out we got new neighbours within those 2 years, and they called an ambulance, and they put me in the ambulance, and I was screaming. There was blood shooting everywhere. I couldn't believe what was happening. I didn't cry, but I was screaming a lot. There was blood everywhere. I was covered in blood. My sister was covered in blood. The ambulance people were covered in blood, and they rushed me to the hospital, and they took me straight in to see the number one neurosurgeon, Dr. Neurosurgeon, and he said, "Oh, this is terrible. You'll live, but you will never use your left leg again." And at first, I was devastated, but then I said to that doctor there on the spot, if I could not use my left leg again, then I shall become better at standing on my right leg than you have ever been standing on 2 legs. With 1 leg, I shall surpass all 2-legged people and become the greatest stander of all time. And even though I fell and birds kept flying into me, I persevered and I made it. And I have become what, at this point, I think I have become the strongest stander there ever is. I started off just standing on top of couches and other small things, cats, dogs, sometimes lunchboxes, and over time I have just become better and better, and in order to become even stronger, I have persevered and increased my standing skill to the maximum. At least that's what I thought. I was standing on a skyscraper one day, repeatedly falling off, breaking my arms but going back, for I knew for a fact that I had to become the greatest stander in the world, and in order to do that, I had to do the greatest training in the world. And then an old man walked up to me, and he's told me, "Dear boy, what are you doing? This is not the correct way to train to stand on 1 leg. I have had my left leg gone for 50 years, and I am the number one one-legged stander in the entire world. Allow me to teach you." And I said, "Very well, what do I have to lose?" I followed the man, and he took me to his old house that was in the middle of earthquake mountains, because there were lots of mountains, and they had an earthquake almost all the time. If there was not an earthquake, it was a big deal. It was basically earthquaking 99.8% of the time. And for some reason, he had ghosts that would jump up on top of his house and attack people on top. But I didn't question him, and he told me, in order to become the best in the world at 1-legged standing, you must concentrate all your chi into your right leg. You must take it away from your lungs. Take it away from your heart. Stop breathing. Take it away from your brain and stop thinking. Take it away from your stomach and stop eating." And I did just that. And surprisingly enough, my right leg was stronger than ever, and my balance was insane. I could not believe how superb I had become at balancing. Just balancing on top of this house in Earthquake Valley became so easy. And he said, "Yes, my boy, follow my teachings, and you shall become the number one best stander in the entire world." And even though many times I fell off the house, each time he would come over and hit me with his cane and say, "You get back up there. You are not finished yet. If that's the best you've got, then you'll never be the best in the world at 1-legged standing." And I listened to my master, and I got back up there every single day. And throughout time, I became able to do it without even sleeping. I could stay awake forever and always stay on 1 leg. balancing to the extreme in Earthquake Mountain. One day, my master said, "I think you have reached the maximum of my training. We shall now have a duel to the death of standing. If you can defeat me in standing, then you will have become the #1 best in the world at standing on one leg." And I went, "But master, I have no reason to challenge you." And he went, "But you must. Otherwise, your journey shall end here. And if you cannot defeat me before I die, then you shall forever know that you will be only #1 because the previous #1 had died. And you do not want that." So I accepted his one-legged standing challenge to the death, and we versed each other. At first, it looked like I was going to lose, but then Master, while he was up there, he had a heart attack, and he fell and died. And it turns out, having all the chi away from his heart for the past 40 years, because it took him 10 years to figure out to do the chi thing, is what killed him. His heart had not been beating for 40 years, and the extra strain of the nervousness of being in a deathmatch pushed him over the line, and he died. But I didn't know what to do then. I had to get away. I had to flee. So I ran and I ran until I couldn't run no more, but I could keep running. But I was just really tired and hungry, and I didn't want to run anymore. And then I saw a spaceship. It turned out NASA was about to launch their brand new spaceship to the undiscovered planet Septolonia, and I instantly jumped on the side of the ship as it took off, and using my chi, I focused all of it into my right leg and was able to stand on the side of the ship as it launched. And I was glad to get away. As I looked at the Earth revolving away, I was sad that my master had passed away, but I realized if I was to truly become the #1 best stander in the world, I had to go to other planets and defeat the best one-legged stander on their world. And thus, my journey through space began. I put on I grabbed one of the astronauts' air helmets along the way and used it so I wouldn't die. But it turns out if you don't actually attach oxygen to it, you will die, or you should have. However, since I had no chi in my lungs in the first place, I wasn't breathing at all. So not breathing didn't matter at all, as I could easily live without doing it. But then something terrible happened. There was an asteroid field. I had never been up against asteroids. The hardest thing I had ever had to do was balance on top of the house in Earthquake Valley. But now I had to not only do it without gravity, but I had to dodge the biggest things I had ever seen. In house in the Earthquake Valley, the mountains did not fly at you, but here everything flew at me. It was a tough journey. But I finally made it to the alien planet Septolonia. And on there, it turns out every single alien on Septolonia only had one leg. And thus, I challenged the #1 one-legged stander in Septolonia. And it was a tough battle. I thought I was going to lose. But he, at the final last moment, tripped on his shoelaces, which somebody had untied beforehand because they were rooting for me, and it turned out later on that it was one of the astronauts on the ship. Of course, I confronted him about it, and I also thanked him, for I most likely would have lost if I had not done this. We then, since I was now the #1 one-legged stander in Septolonia, I was now appointed the king of Septolonia, and lived there very valiantly. I asked if my sister could come, and they said, "Can she stand on one leg?" And I said, No, she can't. She's pretty crap at standing on one leg. She always has been. She was never good at standing on one leg, but that's probably because she's had 2 legs her whole life. And thus, they appointed me king, and I sung, and I danced for them, but then, one day, it turned out that one of them realized about the shoelace incident, and they went to tell the previous king. No, the previous king was dead. The king before him, but I didn't let that happen. No, I went and I killed him. And as he lay there bleeding, he said, "Why?" And I said, "Because I cannot let you stop me from being king at this very moment." And that is what came from above. And then I lived happily ever after. I didn't marry any of the Septolonian women because they were they weren't attractive whatsoever. Having one leg in the middle is very attractive. Not attractive. It's very unattractive. And, I mean, I was just not into that kind of thing. So, I left Septilonia. Once I died. I never left while I was alive, but once I died, I left Septilonia and entered the Great Hall of One-Legged Standers. And went to the One-Legged Standers Valhalla, where I met the guy who I cheated against. And I said, do you forgive me? And he went, it wasn't you who did it. And then we sung and we danced, and that was the end of my one-legged standing story. I hope you enjoyed it. And this is a 100% true story.